911, what is your emergency?
There have been 2 gunshots.
Okay, where's the shots coming from?
The daughter came over here and said that somebody shot her parents.
It was probably one of the most violent crime scenes that I had ever seen.
There were 3 people in the Johnson house that morning when Alan and Diane were murdered.
The shower was still going, and I could see directly into the shower, and there was a bullet hole that was straight on, chest high, straight into the tiles. That certainly was a mystery to us. We have these 2 homicides, and why are these knives placed in the manner that they are, and what does that mean?
The evidence was yelling and screaming. This is what happened.
On September 2nd, 2003, a chilling 911 call was placed to the Blaine County Sheriff's Office by Kim Richards. Kim recounted a chilling moment where her neighbor's 16-year-old daughter, Sarah Johnson, burst into her home, screaming that her parents, 52-year-old Diane and 46-year-old Alan Scott Johnson, had been brutally murdered. Law enforcement and emergency personnel rushed to the location without delay. Upon the arrival of law enforcement, they stepped into the residence and were met with a horrifying sight that unfolded before their eyes. In the bedroom, they discovered Diane lying there, a gunshot wound to her head. She was taken from this world in the quiet of her slumber. The walls and ceiling by the headboard bore gruesome splatters of blood, while a piece of skull lay ominously on the floor. On the floor beside Diane's side of the bed lay the lifeless body of her husband, Alan. He stood there barely covered with crimson liquid gathering around him. Initially, the detectives thought they had a clear and straightforward case. It seemed to be a tragic incident involving both murder and suicide. However, their perspective shifted dramatically after a more detailed examination of the scene. Detectives picked up on the faint sound of water flowing, leading them to trace the blood trail back to the attached bathroom. The water continued to flow, unheeded and unattended. As the officers shut off the water, their eyes were drawn to the chilling evidence. Blood splatter and a clear bullet hole marred the shower wall. The search for additional clues led investigators to comb through the house meticulously. On the bedroom floor lay what investigators suspected to be the weapon used in the crime, a .264 caliber Winston rifle. At the foot of the bed where Diane lay lifeless, 2 kitchen knives rested ominously. A knife was discovered on Matt's bed, raising further concerns. The evidence left behind baffled the detectives. No evidence of forced entry was found, and it was observed that the Johnsons had left their doors unlocked, a detail that remains hidden from the public eye, known only to those intimately connected to the family. The house remained eerily untouched, defying expectations of a chaotic break-in that had spiraled out of control. Investigators at the scene interrogated Sarah about her recollections leading up to her frantic dash to her neighbor's house for assistance. She recounted to the investigators that she had been in a deep sleep when the sound of a gunshot jolted her awake. She dashed to her parents' bedroom, calling for her mother, and that was when the second gunshot echoed through the house. Without a moment's pause, Sarah dashed over to the neighbor's house, seeking assistance. She was unaware of the intruder's presence. The neighbor who dialed 911, Kim Richards, confirmed this statement. Mel Spiegel, a 45-year-old close friend of Alan's, was the tenant of a guest house located on the property.
Mel Spiegel had rented that guest house for years, was a very close friend of Alan and Diane. He works as an electrician.
As the investigators stepped into the house, they stumbled upon a damning piece of evidence resting on the bed. A scope that matched a rifle discovered at the crime scene. Yet Mel seemed to have vanished without a trace. His sudden vanishing act positioned him as a key figure for the detectives involved in the case. The whole area was cordoned off under the directive of lead investigator Sergeant Walt Femling. He instructed the officers to prevent the waste disposal truck from taking any trash cans away from the property. The speculation suggests that Mel could have engaged in a confrontation with Alan and Diane, leading to their deaths in a sudden burst of rage. While delving into this theory, forensic teams meticulously combed through the trash cans. unearthing additional pieces of evidence. Within the confines of the space, a pink bathrobe was discovered, tightly bundled and seemingly out of place. As the crime scene technicians carefully opened the bathrobe, they uncovered a latex glove, a solitary brown leather glove that corresponded with the one discovered in Johnson's bedroom, along with ammunition for a .25 caliber firearm. Every piece of evidence was meticulously labeled and dispatched for DNA analysis as the investigators crafted their narrative. Investigators were starting to piece together the chilling reality that the perpetrator had intimate knowledge of the couple's habits, including the unlocked doors and the specific day the trash was taken out. The possibility exists that the perpetrator disposed of the evidence in the trash before escaping the scene. It was time to bring in Mel Spiegel. Shortly after the shocking double homicide, sheriff's deputies were alerted to the discovery of Mel Spiegel in Boise, Idaho. Mel consented to talk with the investigators and arranged to meet them at the police station in Boise. Authorities probed Mel regarding his activities that morning. Mel shared that he had a weekend filled with family time and intended to head back to Bellevue in a week. Authorities reached out to Mel's relatives, who validated his alibi. Mel was questioned regarding his connections with Alan and Diane. He informed the officers that he had been leasing the guest house from the couple for several years and that they had developed a strong and intimate bond over that time. When questioned about the rifle involved in the killings, Mel confessed that it was indeed his. Nonetheless, he mentioned that it had been secured in his closet before he departed for Boise over the weekend. Investigators subsequently inquired with Mel regarding anyone he thought might have had conflicts with the couple. Mel disclosed that Alan and Diane were beginning to feel anxious about their daughter, Sarah. She began a relationship with a 19-year-old named Bruno Santos. According to Mel's information, Bruno was residing in the country without legal status and was involved in drug dealing to support himself. Investigators found themselves in a challenging position, yet Mel insisted they reach out to additional family members. Detectives embarked on this journey, meticulously assembling the narrative surrounding the Johnson family. Alan and Diane crossed paths in the early 1980s. Diane was previously involved with someone else before crossing paths with Alan, and she had a young son named Matt who was just a toddler at the time. In 1983, the couple tied the knot and Alan embraced Matt as his child. In the serene city of Bellevue, Idaho, a lovely home became the backdrop for a new chapter in 1987, as the Johnson family celebrated the arrival of their daughter, Sarah Marie Johnson, on January 25th of that year. Alan co-owned a landscaping business in Bellevue while Diane served as a tax collector. They had created a picturesque life for their two children, embodying the essence of a devoted family.
Alan was an avid hunter. He's just a wonderful guy. Diane, her passion was cooking. She was always doing something wonderful in the kitchen.
The couple had a notable presence in their community, with Alan being a passionate trap shooter, a hobby shared by many locals. In 2003, to those looking in, their family appeared perfectly balanced. At just 22 years old, Matt was pursuing his studies at the University of Idaho, located in Moscow, Idaho. Sarah was excelling in her studies and actively participated in her school's volleyball team. She was also the center of Alan's world. However, detectives were on the verge of revealing the underlying family conflicts that had begun to surface in the months leading up to this moment. After ruling out Mel as a potential suspect, the investigators heeded his suggestion and went back to Bellevue to interview family members. As anticipated, the Johnsons were widely recognized as a joyful and affectionate family. Authorities conducted interviews with their son, Matt, who had come back from university along with Diane's sister and brother-in-law, Linda and Jim Bevald. All three remarked that the family seemed to be joyful and typical. That is, until Sarah crossed paths with Bruno Santos. Matt, Linda, and Jim all concurred that Sarah's relationship with Bruno had escalated into a significant source of conflict within the family. In the months preceding the tragic event, the atmosphere within the home had become increasingly fraught. As a typical teenager, Sarah instinctively pushed back against the constraints set by her parents. Despite her parents' strict warnings against seeing Bruno, Sarah chose to rebel and pursue her path. However, Jim disclosed details to the investigators that might have provided Bruno with a motive to kill Diane and Alan. In the days leading up to the tragic events, Alan and Diane uncovered the unsettling truth that Sarah had not been truthful about her whereabouts, claiming she was at a female friend's house for the night. Sarah had chosen to spend the night with Bruno instead. Alan reached out to Jim to share the shocking events that unfolded. Alan decided it was time to bring Jim along to face Bruno. Jim recounted to investigators that Alan was seething with anger and had threatened to inform the police about Bruno's assault on Sarah, given her age. With a chilling sense of inevitability, the two men departed, taking Sarah with them. A charge of this magnitude could lead Bruno facing deportation. Following Jim's revelations, investigators concluded that this provided a sufficient motive for Bruno to take out the Johnsons. It was time to confront Bruno Santos. The local law enforcement had a history with Bruno Santos. He had left high school early and had a history of minor offenses related to drugs. During the interrogation, he displayed a defiant attitude towards the detectives. Throughout the interrogation, he displayed a sense of arrogance and proved to be difficult for the investigators to manage. He subsequently informed the investigators that he had asked Sarah to marry him, and she had agreed. Authorities were convinced that his words were meant to demonstrate his affection for Sarah and that he would never risk their bond. When questioned by investigators regarding his location on the morning of the murders, Bruno claimed he had been sleeping on the couch at his home. He instructed the officers to reach out to his mother, who verified that she had been at home with him. For those delving into the case, this remained an insufficient alibi. When investigators questioned Bruno about Alan and Diane, his disdain for the Johnsons was unmistakable. He held a negative opinion of the couple. At the Johnson residence, forensic teams meticulously gathered evidence from every corner of the house. They meticulously employed a UV light to scrutinize every inch of the house for potential blood traces that might reveal the escape path utilized by the perpetrator. During the investigation of Sarah's room, authorities discovered blood splatter and bone fragments on one of the walls. This revelation deepened the enigma surrounding the shooting. The evidence was collected and dispatched to the laboratory for analysis. This revelation left detectives pondering whether Sarah was truthful about her observations from that fateful morning. Investigators uncovered a trove of additional evidence during their search of the room. A solitary brown leather glove, identical to the one discovered wrapped in the refuse. A crucial discovery was made in Sarah's room, where a key to the guest house and unspent .264 caliber shells were uncovered. On one of the unspent shells, there was a tissue matter, likely transferred from the glove as the perpetrator attempted to conceal evidence. This was also forwarded to forensics for examination. Authorities are increasingly convinced that Bruno could be responsible for the deaths of Sarah's parents, seeking her assistance to eliminate the incriminating evidence. Authorities executed a search warrant at Bruno's residence, targeting both him and his mother to gather crucial evidence. Every piece of clothing he donned that day, along with his footwear, was collected for analysis. His fingerprints were collected for comparison with those discovered at the scene of the crime. Bruno was transported to the hospital, where a DNA sample was collected for analysis. Evidence was gathered in the form of hair clippings and hand scrapings. Bruno emerged as the main suspect in the chilling murders of Alan and Diane Johnson. Yet the detectives were on the verge of uncovering details that would steer the inquiry into an entirely unforeseen path. After an exhaustive examination of the garments and footwear seized from Bruno, forensic specialists found no evidence of blood linked to Alan or Diane. At the crime scene itself, there were no signs of DNA, hair, or fingerprints discovered in proximity to the bodies of Alan or Diane. There was also a complete absence of any physical evidence linking Bruno to the couple's room. The analysis of the gloves and bathrobe yielded negative results as well. The detectives found themselves at a complete loss. There was a strong belief that Bruno had the greatest motive to eliminate both Alan and Diane. Nonetheless, the utter absence of any physical evidence that could have linked Bruno to the scene indicated that he was likely being honest. Bruno was ultimately ruled out as a suspect in the investigation. As they examined the case in detail, their thoughts began to turn towards a different suspect. Authorities ramped up their inquiries with Sarah's relatives and acquaintances, delving deeper into her domestic and personal circumstances. It was revealed that Sarah had been giving antidepressants and her relationship with her parents was troubled, to say the least. Relatives remarked that they dismissed her actions as typical for a young adult. Sarah was thought to be at that pivotal age when many kids began to challenge their parents and assert their independence. However, Linda, Sarah's aunt, began to feel uneasy about her niece's actions. She informed the investigators that Sarah was deviating from the typical stages of grief.
She did not seem to be going through any sort of grief at all. She was not concerned about losing her mom and dad. She wanted to see her friends. She wanted to get her nails done. I mean, it was just really bizarre.
Linda observed that Sarah seemed more focused on going back to school and reconnecting with her friends, rather than confronting the grief of losing both her parents. Authorities subsequently reached out to several of Sarah's acquaintances, inquiring about her demeanor following the tragic loss of her parents. Everyone concurred that Sarah displayed a chilling apathy towards the killings. They informed investigators that she appeared to be more focused on having her nails done. What caught their attention was Sarah's heightened concern for Bruno following his arrest. It struck them as peculiar that Sarah felt concern instead of rage towards the person accused of murdering her parents. Detectives found themselves grappling with a chilling reality that was almost too dreadful to confront. Yet they had no alternative but to consider Sarah as a potential suspect. The Johnson residence remained a bustling crime scene, with investigators now focusing their attention on Sarah's room as a secondary point of interest. Detectives on site were now pondering the mystery of how the blood spatter had extended to such a distance. A firearms specialist was summoned to the residence to examine the spatter pattern in detail. Upon examining the trajectory from Alan and Diane's room to Sarah's, the firearms specialist determined that both bedroom doors were ajar during the incident. Authorities had summoned plumbers to the location following reports of a blockage in one of the bathroom toilets. A shower cap seemed to be the culprit behind the blockage. Authorities opted to question Linda, Matt, and Mel Spiegel about certain pieces of evidence they had uncovered. Both Matt and Linda pointed out that the pink bathrobe was Sarah's. Mel revealed that Sarah possessed a key to the guest house and frequently assisted him in tidying up the location. He informed the investigators that Sarah knew about the firearm stored in the closet. Investigators were now tasked with connecting Sarah to the entire body of evidence. However, this would become a chilling point, as those who witnessed the events on the morning of the killings reported that Sarah appeared without any signs of blood when she rushed to a neighbor's home seeking assistance. Forensics experts corroborated this by employing luminol to examine Sarah's clothing for any traces of blood spatter, but they found absolutely nothing. Authorities obtained a warrant to seize and analyze the garment Sarah wore earlier that day. In the meantime, the detectives were eager to interview Sarah once more, hoping to uncover any inconsistencies in her narrative since their previous conversation. Authorities summoned Sarah for another round of questioning. She was living with her aunt and uncle. Minor discrepancies emerged in Sarah's account. Ultimately, the detectives discovered that her account has shifted no fewer than 5 distinct times. In certain accounts, she claimed to have been asleep and awakened by the sound of a gunshot, while in others, she stated that she was already awake when she heard the initial shot. On another occasion, she informed investigators that she remained in her room when the gunshot rang out, but once more altered her narrative, claiming she was outside her parents' bedroom at the time of the second shot. Sarah struggled to recall whether her parents' room door was ajar or shut during the moment of the shooting. Detectives maintained a composed demeanor while interrogating Sarah, ensuring she wouldn't sense their doubts. They were already informed that both bedroom doors stood ajar, which provided the sole explanation for the blood spatter on Sarah's bedroom wall. Sarah was compelled to provide a DNA sample, hair samples, and hand scrapings as part of the inquiry aimed at exonerating her. All of these were dispatched to the lab for analysis. The pajama top and bottom worn by Sarah on the morning of the murders were submitted to the lab for analysis by forensic expert Rod Englert. Under a high-powered microscope, Englert discovered no evidence of blood on the front of the robe. Yet, on the reverse side of the clothing, he discovered intricate patterns of rapid blood splatter. Blue cotton fibers and green specks of paint were discovered on the inside of the robe, matching the shirt Sarah had worn that morning. However, the pivotal moment that would reveal everything was still ahead. Lab results confirmed that Sarah's DNA was present on the inner lining of the latex glove, along with the gun residue found on both pairs of the brown leather glove. The blood discovered on the gloves and robe was traced back to both Alan and Diane. The evidence gathered was sufficient for authorities to apprehend and accuse Sarah of the brutal double murder of Alan and Diane Johnson. On October 29, 2003, Sarah Johnson was taken into custody for the shocking murders of her parents, Alan and Diane Johnson.
Sarah, I have a warrant for your arrest for the murder of your parents, Diane and Alan Johnson. Charged with 2 counts of murder. And you're under arrest. Okay? Stand up.
She remained in custody at the Blaine County Jail with no option for bail as she awaited her trial. The chilling tale of a young girl who took the lives of her parents captured the nation's attention and sparked a media frenzy. Authorities and legal teams needed to construct a convincing narrative that demonstrated Sarah's potential and drive to carry out such a dreadful act. Using accounts from relatives and acquaintances of Sarah and her parents, they began to weave a dark narrative of a young girl caught in the whirlwinds of intense emotions. From the moment Sarah began her relationship with Bruno, her parents expressed their disapproval. Consequently, Sarah began to engage in a secretive behavior, typical of a rebellious teenager trying to assert her independence. Yet the catalyst for Sarah occurred just days before the killings. She deceived her parents, claiming she was at a friend's house, while the truth was she was with Bruno. Sarah reached her breaking point after her father threatened to have Bruno accused of assault and sent back to Mexico. Investigators and prosecutors were convinced that this was the pivotal moment when Sarah devised her scheme to eliminate her parents and pursue a life of happiness with Bruno. As an enthusiast of gripping narratives and chilling tales, Sarah was convinced she had crafted the ideal storyline. On the fateful morning, she rose early and made her way to the guest house to collect the rifle. She carefully donned latex gloves followed by leather gloves and secured a shower cap to protect her hair from any potential blood spatter. To further shield her clothing, she wore her bathrobe backwards, ensuring no blood would come into contact with her attire. Sarah quietly made her way to her parents' room as the sound of her father stepping into the shower echoed through the house, In a chilling act, she took Diane's life with a gunshot to her head as she lay unsuspecting in her slumber. Sarah then heard her father Alan call out, and as the bathroom door swung open, she shot him in the chest. Following the brutal killings, she strategically positioned knives throughout the bedrooms to create the illusion that an intruder was responsible for her parents' deaths. She meticulously gathered the evidence and discarded it in the trash, fully aware that the waste disposal company would collect it long before investigators had a chance to uncover it. Yet, things took an unexpected turn. Furthermore, she overlooked the evidence that was discovered in her room, including the shower cap that had become stuck in the plumbing system. The case against Sarah was undeniable, and the moment for trial had arrived. In February 2005, 2 years following the tragic deaths of her parents, 18-year-old Sarah Johnson faced trial for their murders. The defense team contended that Sarah was not guilty and that an intruder was responsible for the murders of her parents. The prosecution, however, was fully prepared with their case.
There were 3 people in the Johnson house that morning when Alan and Diane were murdered. 2 of them did not come out. 1 person came out alive. That person sits right there, Sarah Marie Johnson.
The court was shown the tangible evidence collected from the scene of the crime, along with accounts from family and friends that highlighted Sarah's unusual behavior following the tragic deaths of her parents. The most incriminating aspect was the testimony of Bruno Santos, who sought to exonerate himself during the trial, while also presenting the jury with insights into Sarah's mental state leading up to the murders. Bruno recounted how he and Sarah had made plans to marry, with Sarah expressing dreams of a life together in a grand, beautiful home filled with happiness just for the 2 of them. Bruno recounted in court that Sarah frequently expressed her deep-seated animosity towards her father and even mentioned the idea of shooting him. Following 5 weeks filled with gripping testimonies, compelling evidence, and detailed crime scene analysis, the jury reached a verdict on March 16, 2005. Sarah, just 18 years old, was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Sarah has repeatedly sought to have her life sentence lessened, yet each of her appeals have been rejected, leaving her still behind bars. The remaining family members have spoken out about Sarah and her actions since her sentencing. The loss of Alan and Diane has ruined their family. The majority believe Sarah was guilty and deserved punishment. Matt, Sarah's brother, thought she didn't regret killing their parents. He said she would murder better if given a second chance to avoid detection.
Sarah, Mom and Dad treated you like a princess. I don't know why you threw it away. Of all the things I miss their hugs. Their bear hugs. And Judge, I would like to see the maximum because after tomorrow and you read your sentencing, I don't want to ever have to hear about her or this event ever again.
Diane's mother, Pat Dishman, spoke to Sarah at sentencing. She told her granddaughter that they loved her, but that her actions had devastated their family.
We have been devastated, absolutely devastated by the deaths of your dad and Mom. And the devastation was even worse when we had to come to the realization of who did it.
Alan's sister, Lynn Merle, said Sarah was spoiled and could murder if released. The judge was asked to consider never releasing her. Today's case was twisted and disturbing. Sarah Johnson's murder of her parents showed that she only cared about herself and not her brother and family. Sarah is imprisoned for her senseless crime while they recover. Today, do you think Sarah can feel remorse? Do you think Bruno planned the murder with Sarah and sold her out to save himself? Comment below if you enjoyed today's video. Please subscribe to our channel, like it, and share it with other crime fans. Post any crime story you want us to cover in the comments below. Until next time, be safe.